What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today I wanted to talk about the Sacramento Kings, who have the door open just a crack for them to potentially sneak into that 10th spot in the Western Conference. So let's go through on the Kings. There are 4 games remaining. We're getting real down to the end of the season here, and we've kind of talked about most of these teams that are in this play-in race. The Kings are one that I have not spoken on recently, so we're just gonna do a quick little preview of the rest of the season for them, and potentially just the very slim chance that they might be able to sneak in here. So here's the reason for optimism for the Kings, is that they potentially could be getting De'Aaron Fox back. That is the first thing, is that he has been out for a couple of weeks now in health and safety protocols, and he has been cleared to rejoin the team. He has not yet played in a game over the past couple of days. They played against the Thunder tonight and won that game. And so he has not yet been cleared to rejoin the roster, but he will potentially soon. They have 4 games remaining on the season, and he might be able to play in all 4 of those, or maybe 3 out of the 4. So that is the good news for them. The bad news is that Tyrese Halliburton will likely miss the rest of the regular season and a play-in game if it does happen. He had, a knee thing, and luckily he avoided some major injury, but that probably is going to keep him out. He's been a standout rookie for them, been really, really good all season long, and has become a key part of their team. But unfortunately, he may have to miss the rest of the regular season. So Halliburton will be out, but De'Aaron Fox is likely coming back soon, and the rest of the roster is relatively healthy. You have Harrison Barnes, Rashawn Holmes, Buddy Hield. All of those guys are there and in the lineup and playing relatively well recently. So they have a little bit of reason for optimism coming down the stretch run of the season here. And you can see the standings up on the screen here. The Kings are currently sitting at 30-38, which is 2.5 games back of the Spurs for that 10th spot, and just 1 game back of the Pelicans for 11th. So not much room for error here, because they are 2.5 games back, like I said, and they only have 4 games left on their season. The Pelicans also have 4 games left, and the Spurs have 5. So the Spurs have an extra game to play, and that's tough. That's the other reason to look to look positively on the rest of the season for the Kings, because the Spurs' remaining schedule is absolutely brutal. And we kind of talked about this in the Spurs video from a while ago, and they've really been scuffling recently. They have a really, really rough stretch to close out the year here, and there's a chance that they might lose every single game remaining. And if that does happen, then there is actually an okay chance that either the Pelicans or the Kings could end up passing them. So here are the final 4 games for the Kings. They play the Oklahoma City Thunder again at home. They just beat them tonight as I'm recording this pretty handily. It was a near 30-point victory. The Thunder are shamelessly taking in my opinion, they're the worst team in the league as currently constructed in terms of who is actually on the floor for them at this point in the year. It's them and the Magic, who are just completely shamelessly trying to lose as hard as possible. So that should be an easy win for Sacramento. They should be able to wrap that one up, considering that they just barely beat them by 30 points, and they have a day off here to rest, and that's at home. So that's a little bit of an easier one, a good break for them there. Then they have 2 games on the road in Memphis, and that's where it starts to get a little tough. Now, Memphis is not unbeatable. They are a solid team. They're hovering around 500 right now, and the Grizzlies are still playing for playoff positioning. They're trying to not only stay out of the 10th spot, but move up into that 8th seed. They're kind of battling with the Golden State Warriors right now for who is going to have to be 8 or 9. And those 2 teams, like I talked about the other day, they play each other the last game of the season. So the Grizzlies and the Warriors are both very much playing for something, and the Kings have the chance to play spoiler here for Memphis. They have they have 2 games in Memphis there, and a chance to potentially pull off some upsets and put the Grizzlies in a bad spot going into that final matchup with Golden State. So that's where we're at with that. And then the final game of the year, they play the Utah Jazz, who are, they're currently in the 1 spot in the Western Conference. The Suns just lost tonight, which puts them, I believe, 2 games back of the Jazz. So Utah potentially might not be playing for anything by that point. They could have the 1 seed locked up. Maybe if the Suns, go on a run here and the Jazz maybe lose a couple of games pretty quickly, then there's a chance that they might, have to still close out that final game to be the 1 seed in the Western Conference. But there is a solid chance that they end up locking everything up, and they're not going to be playing for anything, so they're going to rest guys on their final day of the regular season. So the Jazz game could potentially be easy. We'll have to see how seeding shakes out for them, but potential break for the Kings there. OKC game is easy. The tough is 2 games in Memphis. Now that is a back-to-back, but it's a back-to-back for both teams because they're playing each other twice, so no advantage or disadvantage of being a back-to-back. Being on the road is tough, but it's not like they have to do any crazy traveling, and so that's where we're at with the final 4 games of the Kings season. Now, this is important. They recently lost a game to the Spurs a couple of days ago. And that was a big one for them, because had they won that game, not only do they hand the Spurs another loss and hand themselves another win, but that would have given them the tiebreaker. They now lose the tiebreaker with San Antonio, and the Spurs can create a little more separation from them in the standings. So it becomes a lot more of an uphill climb. If they had had that game, it would be a lot more likely that they could potentially sneak in. But now they need the Spurs to lose at least like 3 or 4 out of their final 5 games at least, and the Kings need to, pretty much either go undefeated or at least win 3 out of their last 4. If we're just looking at strictly numbers here, the Kings cannot afford to lose 2 games. They can at most lose only 1, and in that case, they would have to have the Spurs lose all 5 of their games remaining, because if we look at the standings over here, the Kings are at 38 losses on the season, and the Spurs currently are at 35. So let me put these numbers back up on the screen so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Kings have 38 losses, like I said. Spurs have 35. Spurs have 5 games left. Kings have 4. So if the Kings lose 2 of their remaining games and gets them to 40 losses on the season, the Spurs lose all 5, which also gets them to 40 losses. Then that would mean that the Spurs have the tiebreaker, because they beat the Kings 2-1 in the season series, and that is the first tiebreaker, which would give the overall to the Spurs. So even if the Kings only win 2 out of the remaining 4 of their games and the Spurs lose all 5, then we're out. It's over. If the Kings win 3 games of their final remaining, only lose 1, that gets them to 39 losses, they have to hope that the Spurs lose all 5 of their games, and that would get them in. So if the Spurs lose out completely, the Kings win 3 out of their final 4, then that would be enough to get them in. If the Kings win 4 of their, go win all 4 of their final games on the year, finish the season undefeated from where we're at right now, they would have to hope the Spurs lose at least 4 out of 5 of their remaining games. So that's kind of where we're at here. It's really, really tight, and there's a lot of permutations here. The Kings could be out of this. They could be out of this in like 2 days, or they could still be in it until the final game of the season. So just so we're all on the same page here is the remaining schedule for the San Antonio Spurs. They have games against the Bucks, then a quick road trip to New York for Brooklyn Nets and New York Knicks, then 2 games at home against the Phoenix Suns. Now this looks horrible on paper, and don't get me wrong, this is absolutely horrible, because the Bucks are still playing for seeding, and that is up next. Then they have a back-to-back in New York with the Nets and the Knicks, who are also both still playing for seeding. Then final 2 games of the year, back-to-back against the Phoenix Suns at home. Now, the Suns might also not be playing for something at that point in the season, considering that they're now a couple of games back of the Jazz for the 1 seed, and they're a couple of games ahead of the Clippers and the Denver Nuggets for that number 2 spot. So there's a chance that the Spurs might not care for those final 2 games, and they might rest guys, which would give San Antonio a break. So we'll just have to see how that goes, but this is the final 5 remaining games for San Antonio, and like I said, if they lose all 5, then they would have to hope that the Kings don't go 3-1 or better. And if they even lose 4 out of the 5, then they would have to, the Kings could go undefeated and still pass them. Now, if the Spurs win 2 of these remaining games, they're in at least over Sacramento. They have to win just 2 out of the remaining 5, they'll be in over Sacramento. Then they will have to win 3 out of 5 at least to be in over New Orleans, assuming that both Sacramento and New Orleans win out the rest of the season. I hope that made sense, but this is kind of the late season scenarios that we're in with these teams. So again, 4 games remaining for Sacramento. If you lose 2 or more, you're done. Season over, not making the playoffs. If you win 3 of them, you have to hope that the Spurs lose every single game the rest of the year. If you win all 4, you have to hope that the Spurs lose 4 out of their last 5. So unlikely that the Kings will get into the playoffs, considering that the Spurs do have a super tough schedule, but, it's a real razor-thin margin for error here. Kings have to win out. There's no other option, basically. Win out or at most lose only 1, but even then, you're really hoping that San Antonio struggles. And also, the Spurs having the Suns on that back-to-back for the final couple games of the year might be advantageous for them, considering that the Suns are one of those teams that could potentially not be playing for anything by the time that rolls around, considering how the standings are shaking out at the moment. But hey, still some hope for the Kings here. They've got some hope alive coming down to the stretch run here. They've actually won 5 of their last 6, and that 1 loss coming to San Antonio. So That game was huge in hindsight. I actually kind of wasn't really aware of how big that game was going to be because I had really sort of written off the Kings as a potential play-in threat. It felt like it was going to be the Pelicans creeping up on that 10th spot, and if it wasn't going to be them, then it was going to be nobody. But Sacramento has thrown their name into the hat here, and they're still alive in the playoff race. With, you know, they've played well over the past couple of weeks, and they're kind of clicking at the right time. De'Aaron Fox is coming back, but they have a very thin margin for error. They're going to have to play super well and hope that the Spurs tank. So it is possible, unlikely. But yeah, that's all I have on the Sacramento Kings and their fading playoff hopes. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Kings and their season. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. But with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.